Every story has a moment that changes everything. And today, we're about to discover it. A billionaire collapsed in the middle of a meeting worth hundreds of millions of dollars. 30 seconds earlier, people were taking notes. Executives were watching. Investors were listening. The future of an empire was being discussed. Then suddenly, the man standing at the center of it all couldn't finish his sentence. His vision blurred. His chest tightened. And before anyone understood what was happening, he crashed to the floor. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The most powerful person in the room had just become the most helpless. But that wasn't the moment that changed everything. No, the moment that changed everything happened 18 hours later, in a hospital room, when that same billionaire opened his eyes and discovered that the woman he had lost 2 years earlier had never truly left. Not after the divorce, not after the silence, not after the heartbreak. She was still there, waiting, watching, praying, and what happened after that would force him to confront a truth worth far more than all the money he had spent his life chasing. Today's story is emotional. It's inspiring. And before we begin, I want to ask you something. Do you believe true love deserves a second chance? If your answer is yes, let us know in the comments below. And if stories about loyalty, family, sacrifice, and life-changing decisions mean something to you, please take a second to like this video. That simple action helps YouTube share these stories with more people. And if you're new here, subscribe to the channel and join our growing family. Your support genuinely helps us continue bringing powerful stories like this to life. Now, let's begin. Welcome to Mr. Obama Stories, where stories don't just get told. They come alive. This is the home of powerful American stories. Stories of struggle, success, mystery, history, and the unforgettable moments that shaped people, communities, and dreams. From inspiring life journeys to shocking real events, every story here is crafted to make you think, feel, and see the world differently. At Mr. Obama Stories, we believe every voice matters and every story carries a lesson. Whether it's motivation, history, real-life drama, or untold experiences, you'll always leave with something unforgettable. So sit back, relax, and let the story begin. Because here, every story has a meaning, and every meaning has a story. Subscribe and become part of the journey. At 38 years old, Caleb was the kind of man people pointed at when discussing success. Business magazines praised him. Financial television programs analyzed him. Competitors studied him. Employees admired him. His company had grown from a modest startup into one of the most respected businesses in North Carolina. From the outside, Caleb's life looked perfect. The money, the recognition, the beautiful home, the private flights, the influence, everything most people spend their entire lives pursuing. Yet on a cold Tuesday morning in High Point, North Carolina, Caleb stood inside a glass-walled conference room feeling something very few people knew about. Exhaustion, not physical exhaustion. Something deeper. The kind that settles into a person's soul. The kind that builds quietly over years. The kind that no amount of money can erase. 22 floors above the city, executives filled every seat around a massive conference table. Charts illuminated a giant screen. Financial projections stretched across multiple displays. The atmosphere carried enormous expectations. This presentation mattered. Investors were waiting. A major expansion plan was being finalized. If approved, it would push the company into an entirely new level of success. Everyone expected Caleb to deliver. After all, that's what Caleb always did. Deliver, no matter the pressure, no matter the cost. He stood at the front of the room reviewing projected growth numbers while dozens of eyes remained fixed on him. Confident, focused, professional, at least on the surface. Because beneath that calm exterior, something wasn't right. He hadn't slept much. His schedule had become relentless. Meals were skipped. Exercise had become an afterthought. Personal relationships had slowly disappeared beneath endless meetings and deadlines. The warning signs had been there for a long time. He simply ignored them, like many successful people do. Projected growth for the next quarter will exceed our previous forecast by... Caleb stopped speaking. The room became strangely quiet. His hand tightened against the edge of the presentation table. A sharp pressure gripped his chest. His vision shifted. The screen in front of him suddenly seemed farther away. One executive frowned. Another leaned forward. A woman near the end of the table exchanged a concerned glance with a colleague. Something was wrong, very wrong. Caleb blinked. The faces around him became difficult to focus on. The numbers on the screen merged together. For a second, he tried to continue, tried to push through, tried to do what he had always done. Ignore the problem. Keep working, keep moving, keep performing. But his body had reached its limit. Caleb? One voice spoke, then another. Sir? His knees weakened. The conference room tilted. The floor rushed upward, and everything went dark. The last thing he heard was the sound of frightened voices calling his name. The first thing he heard afterward was a steady electronic beep, 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 a sound that would become the beginning of a completely different life. The steady beeping continued. Beep, beep, beep. Caleb slowly opened his eyes. At first, nothing made sense. A white ceiling stared back at him. Bright lights, a faint smell of disinfectant, an unfamiliar weight in his arms. He blinked several times. His throat felt dry. His body felt unusually heavy. For a few seconds, he couldn't remember where he was or why he was there. Then fragments began returning. The boardroom, the presentation, the charts, the pressure in his chest, the voices, the fall. A nurse, standing near the doorway, immediately noticed he was awake. Relief crossed her face. "Oh, good," she said softly as she approached the bed. "Welcome back." Caleb tried to sit upright. The attempt lasted less than 2 seconds. The room tilted. The nurse quickly stepped forward. "Easy." He slowly settled back against the pillow. His voice came out rough. "What happened?" "You collapsed during a board meeting." Caleb closed his eyes briefly. The memory returned more clearly now. The giant screen, the presentation, the sudden weakness, the darkness. He swallowed. "How long have I been here?" "Almost 18 hours. His eyes opened immediately. 18? The nurse nodded. "You gave everyone quite a scare." Caleb stared at the ceiling. 18 hours. His phone was probably exploding with messages. Board members, executives, investors, assistants, lawyers, reporters. Everyone would be looking for answers. Normally, that thought would have sent him reaching for a laptop. Normally, not today. His body wouldn't allow it. The nurse adjusted one of the monitors. Then she smiled. "Someone will be very happy to know you're awake." Caleb frowned. "What do you mean?" The nurse glanced toward the closed door. "Your emergency contact." A strange feeling settled in his stomach. Emergency contact. The phrase sounded oddly distant, almost forgotten. "Who is it?" The nurse looked surprised. "You don't know?" Caleb shook his head slightly. Truthfully, he hadn't thought about emergency contacts in years. The nurse smiled again. "She's been here almost the entire time." Caleb stared at her. "She? Wouldn't leave." The nurse laughed softly. "We practically had to convince her to eat something." Caleb's confusion deepened. There weren't many people who would sit in a hospital for 18 hours waiting for him. His employees respected him. His investors needed him. His business associates admired him. But waiting beside a hospital bed? That was different. The nurse checked another monitor. She looked worried. Caleb remained silent. A question formed inside his mind. Then another. Then another. There was only one person listed as his emergency contact. At least there used to be, but that couldn't be right. Not anymore. 2 years had passed. 2 years of separate lives. 2 years without real conversations. 2 years of convincing himself certain chapters were permanently over. His heartbeat seemed louder now. The nurse noticed his expression. "You okay?" "Yeah." But he wasn't, because suddenly he remembered exactly who had once been listed on every emergency form. Jada. The thought alone felt strange. Impossible. Why would she still be there? Why wouldn't she move on? Why would she spend nearly an entire day sitting beside someone she had divorced? None of it made sense. The nurse smiled gently. "I'll let her know you're awake." Before Caleb could respond, She walked toward the door. The room became quiet again. His eyes followed her movement. His pulse quickened. The handle slowly turned. The door opened. And there she was, Jada. For a second, Caleb forgot how to breathe. She stood motionless near the entrance. Neither spoke. Neither moved. The room suddenly felt much smaller. Jada looked different than he remembered. Her hair was longer. Her posture carried more confidence. There was a calmness about her that hadn't existed years earlier. Yet her eyes remained exactly the same. Those warm brown eyes. The eyes that once knew every dream he had. Every fear. Every ambition. Every weakness. The eyes he had spent 2 years trying not to think about. For several seconds, neither said a word. The silence stretched. Not uncomfortable, just heavy, filled with things neither knew how to express. Finally, Jada crossed her arms. "You look terrible." Caleb blinked, then unexpectedly laughed. The laugh hurt his chest, but he couldn't stop it. It was such a Jada thing to say. Not dramatic, not overly emotional, just honest. You always know exactly what to say. Someone has to. A small smile appeared on her face. Caleb stared at her, still trying to process the reality in front of him. "You stayed?" The question escaped before he could stop it. Jada's expression changed, just slightly, enough for him to notice. What kind of question is that? Caleb looked away, because honestly, he wasn't sure why he asked it. Maybe because he had spent 2 years believing she no longer cared. Maybe because believing that had been easier. Maybe because seeing her here challenged everything he thought he knew. Jada stepped closer to the bed. "You scared everyone." Her voice softened. "Especially your mother." Caleb nodded slowly. Guilt immediately surfaced. His mother. He hadn't even thought about how worried she must be. Jada pulled a chair closer and sat down. The movement felt strangely familiar, like a memory returning after years away. Neither rushed to fill the silence. Neither knew where to begin, because some people leave your life, but never completely leave your heart. And sitting there in that hospital room, Caleb realized something he wasn't prepared to admit. Seeing Jada again hurt, not because she was there, because part of him wished she had never left. The following morning arrived slowly. Sunlight filtered through the hospital window. For the first time in years, Caleb woke up without checking emails, without grabbing a phone, without asking about meetings, without reviewing reports. His body simply didn't have the energy. The doctor had already delivered the same message twice. Rest, slow down, pay attention. Simple advice. Yet somehow, it felt more difficult than negotiating a billion-dollar contract. Caleb stared out the window. The city looked distant from the hospital room. Cars moved below. People hurried through their routines. Life continued, as if nothing had happened. Yet, something had happened. Something important. For the first time in a very long time, Caleb had been forced to stop, and stopping left him alone with thoughts he usually buried beneath work. Thoughts about Jada. Thoughts about the life they once shared. Thoughts about how everything had fallen apart. The door opened quietly. Jada stepped inside carrying a cup of coffee. "Morning." Caleb looked toward her. "Morning." She placed the coffee on a nearby table. "You look slightly less terrible today." A faint smile appeared on Caleb's face. "High praise coming from you. I believe in honesty." Clearly. For a moment, the conversation felt easy, natural. Then, silence settled between them. Not awkward, just thoughtful. Jada sat near the window. Caleb watched her for a moment. There were hundreds of questions he could ask, but only one kept returning. Finally, he spoke. "Why are you still my emergency contact?" Jada looked up. The question seemed to catch her off guard. "What?" "My emergency contact." Caleb held her gaze. "We got divorced 2 years ago." Jada looked toward the floor briefly, then back at him. "So?" Caleb stared. "So?" A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "You still have mine." That answer immediately stopped him, because she was right. He still had hers. The realization hit harder than expected. Neither of them had changed it. Neither. After all the legal paperwork, after all the difficult conversations, After all the months of separation, neither had removed the other. The silence lingered. This time, it carried a different meaning, not tension. Something softer. Something neither was ready to define. Caleb looked away first, because deep down, he already knew the truth. Changing a phone number was easy. Changing paperwork was easy. Letting go completely was not. His mind drifted backward. Back to the years before the divorce. Back to when everything still felt possible. Back to when success seemed simpler. Back when he believed he could balance everything. Career, marriage, dreams, family. The problem wasn't that Caleb stopped loving Jada. The problem was that he convinced himself he could postpone everything important. Just one more meeting, just one more project, just one more expansion, just one more deal. That phrase became a habit, and habits become lifestyles. At first, Jada understood. She supported his ambitions, encouraged his goals, celebrated every milestone. But eventually, support became loneliness. Weeks became months. Dinner conversations became shorter. Vacations became canceled plans. Date nights became conference calls. Promises became delays. The damage didn't happen all at once. It happened little by little, almost invisibly, like a crack forming inside glass. One day, everything looks normal. The next day, the damage is impossible to ignore. Caleb remembered one particular evening. Jada had prepared dinner. Nothing fancy, just time together. That was all she wanted. Time. He never made it home. A meeting ran late, then another, then another. By the time he returned, the food was cold. The candles had burned out. Jada had gone to bed. At the time, he told himself it wasn't a big deal. Now he understood differently. Because relationships rarely break because of one large mistake. They break because of countless small disappointments, one after another, until the distance becomes difficult to cross. Jada seemed lost in her own memories too. Finally she spoke. We weren't bad people. Caleb looked at her. No. We were just moving in different directions. The honesty in her voice made it difficult to argue, because she was right. There had been no betrayal, no scandal, no dramatic explosion, just two people slowly drifting apart, each believing there would be time to fix things later, until later never arrived. The sound of footsteps interrupted the conversation. A moment later, the door swung open. Caleb's mother entered carrying flowers. The second she saw him awake, relief flooded her face. Oh, thank goodness. She hurried forward. The flowers nearly slipped from her hands. Caleb immediately sat up straighter. Mom. She embraced him carefully. For a moment, neither spoke. The emotion said enough. When she finally stepped back, tears glistened in her eyes. You scared me. I'm sorry. You should be. Caleb laughed softly. Only his mother could scold him while nearly crying. Then something unexpected happened. His mother's attention shifted toward Jada, and her entire face brightened. My goodness. She walked directly toward her. Before Jada could react, she found herself wrapped in a warm embrace. It's so good to see you. Jada smiled. You too. Caleb watched silently. Something felt unusual. Not wrong, just unexpected. The interaction seemed incredibly comfortable, natural, as though they had seen each other recently. His mother sat beside Jada. Almost immediately, they began talking. Not awkwardly, not politely, comfortably. Like people who never stopped communicating, they discussed books, a neighbor, a recent community event, a recipe. Caleb listened quietly, confusion slowly growing. Because this wasn't the interaction of two people who hadn't spoken for years. This felt different, much different. At one point, his mother laughed at something Jada said. A genuine laugh, the kind that comes from familiarity. Caleb noticed it immediately. His mother noticed him noticing. A knowing smile crossed her face, but she didn't explain. Neither did Jada. The conversation simply continued, for nearly 30 minutes. Watching them together stirred something inside Caleb, a realization he wasn't entirely prepared for. While he had spent 2 years convincing himself, certain relationships had ended. Some connections had quietly survived. Without announcements, without attention, without recognition, they had simply continued, steadily, faithfully. The thought stayed with him long after visiting hours ended, and as evening settled outside the hospital window, Caleb found himself wondering a question he had never considered before: how much of Jada's life had continued touching his own, without him ever knowing. 3 days later, Caleb was finally discharged from the hospital. The doctors gave him strict instructions: rest, reduce stress, slow down, eat properly, sleep properly, take care of himself. Caleb listened, or at least he appeared to listen. The truth was, most of his attention remained focused on something else: Jada, the conversations, the memories, the questions that seemed to multiply every day. Outside the hospital, a driver waited to take him home. The ride through High Point felt strangely different, maybe because he hadn't noticed the city in years. Normally, he spent those drives answering calls, reviewing reports, preparing for meetings, living 3 steps ahead of the present moment. Today, he simply watched. Neighborhoods passed by, small businesses, families walking together, children riding bicycles, ordinary moments. The kind of moments he once promised himself success would create more time for, yet somehow success had done the opposite. By the time he arrived home, the sun was beginning to set. The large gates opened automatically. His house stood exactly as it always had: impressive, expensive, perfectly maintained, and completely quiet. The silence greeted him immediately. No conversation, no laughter, no footsteps, nothing, just empty rooms. Caleb walked inside. The house felt bigger than he remembered. For years he had viewed it as proof of achievement. Now it felt more like a reminder of everything missing. He loosened his tie and slowly lowered himself onto a sofa. The exhaustion wasn't physical anymore. It was emotional. His phone buzzed, then buzzed again and again. Executives, investors, business associates. Messages continued arriving. Caleb turned the phone face down. For once, the world could wait. That evening, he decided to call his mother. The conversation started normally. Questions about his recovery, questions about medication, questions only mothers ask. Halfway through the call, something caught his attention: a box sitting on her kitchen counter. Large, neatly packed, freshly delivered. Caleb frowned. What's that? His mother glanced behind her. Oh, that? Yeah. She smiled casually. Just another care package. Caleb sat upright. Another? Of course. The answer immediately grabbed his attention. What do you mean, another? His mother looked confused. The monthly package. Caleb blinked. The monthly what? Now she seemed surprised. You don't know? A strange feeling settled in his stomach. No what? His mother turned the camera toward the box. It's one of the packages. Caleb stared. Who's sending them? His mother hesitated, only briefly, then she smiled. Jada. For several seconds, Caleb didn't react. The name hung in the air, almost impossible to process. Jada? His mother nodded. She's been sending them for years. Years, not months, years. The word echoed through his mind. Since the divorce? His mother's expression softened. Not long after. Caleb sat speechless. His mother opened the package. Inside were groceries, tea, medicine, several household supplies, a new book, a handwritten note, nothing expensive, nothing designed to impress anyone, just thoughtful things, useful things, kind things. His mother carefully picked up the note. She always includes one. Caleb swallowed. Every month? Every month. The guilt arrived slowly, heavy, uncomfortable. Because during those same years, Caleb had assumed Jada moved on, assumed she stopped caring, assumed she had left that chapter of her life behind. Yet, while he was making assumptions, she had quietly continued showing up. Not for recognition, not for attention, not because anyone expected her to, simply because she cared. His mother smiled. She's a good woman. Caleb looked away, because deep down, he already knew that. The call ended, but the conversation stayed with him for the rest of the evening and most of the night. The next morning, he found himself thinking about Jada again. Not about their marriage, not about the divorce, about her character. The kind of person who helps someone when nobody is watching. The kind of person who keeps showing up after everyone else leaves. The kind of person who remains loyal without needing applause. That realization bothered him, not because it was untrue, because it was true, and because he had forgotten how rare that kind of person really was. Several days later, curiosity finally won. At least that's what Caleb told himself. Curiosity, nothing more. That explanation sounded safer than the truth. The truth was that he wanted to see her. Late Saturday morning, he drove toward a small community center on the edge of town. His mother had mentioned that Jada volunteered there every weekend. He parked across the street. For a moment, he remained inside the car. Then he noticed movement through one of the windows. Children, paint, laughter, activity, and in the middle of it all, Jada. Caleb stepped outside, quietly approaching the building. Through the glass, he watched. Jada sat beside a group of children gathered around a long table. One little girl proudly held up a painting. Jada immediately clapped. The girl's entire face lit up. A few moments later, another child accidentally knocked over a container of paint. Blue paint spread across part of the table. The room instantly fell silent. The child looked horrified, frozen, certain trouble was coming. Jada looked down at the mess, then back at the child. For a second, nobody moved. Then she smiled. Well, the child nervously swallowed. Jada pointed at the table. I guess we know which color was your favorite. The room exploded with laughter. Even the embarrassed child started laughing. Just like that, the fear disappeared. The mistake became a joke. The tension vanished. Caleb smiled without realizing it, because that was exactly who Jada had always been. Someone who made people feel safe. Someone who made people feel accepted. Someone who somehow knew how to turn embarrassment into comfort. For several minutes, he simply stood there watching children gather around her, watching her encourage them, watching her listen, actually listen, not waiting for her turn to speak, not distracted, present, completely present. The realization struck him unexpectedly. Years ago, this was one of the things he loved most about her. And somewhere along the way, he had stopped paying attention. As if sensing someone watching, Jada glanced toward the window. Their eyes met immediately. The smile on her face faded. Not because she was upset, because she was surprised. For a brief moment, neither moved. Then Jada stood and walked outside. The autumn air felt cool between them. What are you doing here? Caleb slipped his hands into his pockets. I came to say thank you. Jada looked genuinely confused. For what? My mother. Something changed in her expression. A softness, a quiet understanding. She looked away briefly, then back at him. She never stopped being family. The words landed harder than she probably realized. Because family wasn't always defined by paperwork. Sometimes it was defined by actions, by loyalty, by consistency, by showing up. Even after life becomes complicated, Caleb stood quietly, searching for something meaningful to say. Nothing felt adequate. Finally, he managed a simple answer. Thank you. Jada nodded. Neither spoke for a moment. Children laughed inside the building. The sound drifted through the open doorway. And standing there beside her, Caleb felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Regret. Not because he lacked money, not because he lacked success, because he had failed to recognize the value of certain people while they were still beside him. For the first time, Caleb began understanding what he had truly lost, and unknown to both of them. The hospital collapse was only the beginning, because a forgotten promise, a child who never stopped believing, and a truth, waiting quietly in the years behind them, was moving closer every day, and when it finally arrived, nothing in their lives would ever be the same. That conversation outside the community center stayed with Caleb longer than he expected, not because it was dramatic, not because something extraordinary happened. In fact, the conversation lasted less than 10 minutes, yet somehow those 10 minutes occupied his thoughts for days. Maybe it was the way Jada had said it. She never stopped being family. Simple words, but they carried weight. The kind of weight that follows a person home. The kind that sits beside them during quiet moments. The kind that refuses to disappear. Several days later, Caleb found himself driving through High Point without much of a destination. His recovery was progressing. The doctors were pleased. His staff had finally stopped calling every 20 minutes, and for the first time in years, he had an unusual amount of free time. The adjustment wasn't easy. For most of his adult life, every hour had been planned, every minute accounted for. Now entire afternoons stretched ahead without meetings, without deadlines, without pressure. It felt unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable. As he drove through town, a familiar building appeared ahead, a small diner, nothing fancy, just a local place he used to visit years ago, back before private chefs, back before corporate events, back before success complicated everything. Without thinking much about it, Caleb pulled into the parking lot. The smell of coffee greeted him immediately after he stepped inside. The diner looked exactly the same. Same booths, same menu board, same collection of framed photographs covering one wall. For a moment, he simply stood there. Then, a familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. "Well, this is unexpected." Caleb turned and immediately laughed. Jada sat near a window booth holding a coffee cup. She looked amused. Very amused. "What?" She tilted her head. "I was just wondering if billionaires still eat in places like this." Caleb groaned. "Here we go." "Oh, absolutely." Jada pointed toward the empty seat across from her. "You used to come here before every major presentation." "You remember that?" "I remember you ordering the same breakfast every time." Caleb sat down. "I was predictable." "You still are." He shook his head. "You always enjoyed being difficult." "Only with you." The waitress approached. Caleb ordered coffee. Jada immediately interrupted. "And the usual." The waitress laughed. "You remember?" "Unfortunately." The waitress smiled. "I'll put it in." Caleb looked at Jada. "You remembered my order?" She shrugged. "You ate it for years." Something about that answer caught him off guard. Not because it was surprising, because it reminded him how much history existed between them. Years of history, the kind that never completely disappears. Their breakfast arrived a few minutes later. The conversation started casually. Stories from the community center, stories from work, stories from life. Then, without either of them planning it, old memories began resurfacing. The good ones, the funny ones, the embarrassing ones. Jada pointed her fork toward him. "Remember our first apartment?" Caleb laughed immediately. "The one with the broken air conditioner?" "The one that sounded like a lawnmower." Caleb nearly choked on his coffee. "Oh, wow." Jada smiled. "I couldn't hear television over that thing." "You named it." "I had to." "You named an air conditioner." "It had a personality." Caleb laughed harder. "What was the name?" Jada looked proud of herself. "Frank." Caleb covered his face. "I cannot believe I forgot that." "You forgot lots of things." "Apparently." For several minutes they laughed about old memories. Not the painful ones. The good ones. The moments that made them smile. The moments that had somehow survived everything else. One memory led to another, then another. Soon they were talking about their first date. A conversation Caleb had not expected. Jada smiled into her coffee. "You were so nervous." "I wasn't nervous." "You knocked over your drink." "One time." "Twice." "It was a small table." "You walked into a glass door." Caleb immediately pointed at her. "That happened once." "3 times." He stared. She stared back. Then both burst into laughter. Several people nearby glanced over. Neither cared. For a few minutes, it felt strangely familiar. Comfortable. Easy. Like two old friends rediscovering a conversation they had paused years earlier. The laughter eventually faded. The mood shifted naturally. Neither forced it. Neither avoided it. It simply happened. Jada looked down at her coffee. The smile slowly disappeared. "Do you ever think about it?" The question arrived quietly, but Caleb understood it immediately. "The divorce?" She nodded. Neither spoke for several seconds. The diner suddenly seemed much quieter. Outside, traffic moved past the windows. Inside, coffee cups clinked against tables. Life continued around them, yet neither noticed. Finally, Caleb answered, "Every day." Jada looked up. The honesty clearly surprised her. Caleb continued before he could second-guess himself. "I used to convince myself I didn't." His fingers traced the edge of the coffee cup. "But I did." Jada remained silent, listening. Actually listening. Caleb exhaled slowly. "I blamed you for a long time." The words hung between them, painfully honest. Jada nodded. "I know. I thought you stopped believing in us." Her eyes softened. "And I thought your company mattered more than our marriage." Neither argued, neither defended themselves, because both statements contained truth, not complete truth, but enough truth to hurt. Caleb stared toward the window. For years he had replayed those final months, the missed dinners, the canceled weekends, the promises pushed forward, the conversations postponed, always postponed, until eventually there were no conversations left, only silence. And silence is dangerous, because silence creates distance. Distance creates assumptions, and assumptions create walls. Jada looked toward him. "We were hurting too." Caleb nodded slowly. "Yeah." For the first time, neither seemed interested in winning old arguments. Neither seemed interested in assigning blame. Maybe enough time had passed. Maybe they had both changed. Or maybe life had finally taught them what mattered. The realization settled quietly between them. Not every relationship ends because love disappears. Sometimes people simply stop finding their way back to each other. The difference now was that they were sitting across from each other again, talking, laughing, listening, trying, and for the first time in years, the memories didn't feel like open wounds. They felt like reminders. Reminders of two people who once meant everything to each other, and perhaps still did. As they finished breakfast, neither wanted to be the first to leave. Neither said it, neither needed to, because, for the first time since the divorce, something had begun to heal. Not completely, not quickly, but undeniably, and neither one of them could ignore it anymore. The breakfast at the diner should have felt like the end of something. Instead, it felt like a beginning. Not a dramatic beginning, not the kind people write songs about, just two people slowly finding their way back into each other's lives. Carefully, naturally, without forcing anything. Over the following weeks, Caleb and Jada crossed paths more often. A community fundraiser, a charity event, a quick phone call that lasted longer than expected, a conversation that continued well after sunset. Nothing was planned, at least that's what they both claimed. The truth was a little more complicated, because both of them had started looking forward to those conversations. Neither admitted it. Neither needed to. The evidence was already there. One afternoon, Caleb caught himself smiling after reading a text message from Jada. He stared at the phone, then immediately shook his head. Seriously? The smile remained anyway. Another evening, Jada found herself laughing at something Caleb had said hours earlier. Alone, in her kitchen, she stopped stirring her tea, then laughed again, because she realized exactly what was happening. Some connections don't disappear. Sometimes they simply wait, waiting for people to become the versions of themselves they were meant to be. One Saturday evening, they found themselves sitting on a park bench overlooking a small lake near the edge of town. The weather was perfect. Children played nearby. Couples walked along winding paths. The water reflected the fading colors of the sky. For several minutes, neither spoke. The silence felt comfortable, not awkward. The kind of silence shared by people who don't feel pressured to fill every moment with words. Jada watched a group of children chasing ducks along the shoreline. One child nearly slipped. The ducks escaped unharmed. The child looked personally offended. Jada laughed. Caleb followed her gaze. "What?" "The ducks won." He watched for a moment. Decisive victory. Not even close. They both smiled. The moment passed. The laughter settled. Then Jada spoke again. "Remember our first date?" Caleb immediately groaned. "Oh no." She laughed. "Oh, yes. You bring this up entirely too often." "Because it's funny." "It wasn't funny." "It absolutely was." Caleb shook his head. Jada continued anyway. You spent 20 minutes rehearsing conversation topics. I was prepared. You had note cards. Caleb looked horrified. You remember the note cards? I remember everything. He covered his face. Please stop. I can't. The laughter returned. Easy, natural, comfortable. Eventually, it faded again. This time, something quieter settled between them. Jada stared across the lake. Her expression changed, just slightly, enough for Caleb to notice. What are you thinking about? She hesitated, not because she didn't want to answer, because she was deciding how honest to be. Finally, she spoke. How different everything feels. Caleb nodded. He understood, more than she realized, because 6 months earlier, he never would have imagined sitting here. No presentations, no deadlines, no pressure, just time, actual time, the thing he once believed he couldn't afford. Now, it felt priceless. The thought stayed with him, long after they left the park, long after the conversation ended. A few weeks later, the town received sad news. A respected elderly woman passed away following a long illness. Many people knew her, many people admired her. The funeral service filled quickly. Families gathered, friends shared memories. The atmosphere carried the quiet weight that accompanies every goodbye. Caleb attended, Jada attended. Neither arrived together, yet somehow, they ended up standing near each other throughout most of the service. As people spoke, stories filled the room. Stories about kindness, stories about generosity, stories about showing up for others. The kind of stories people tell when a life has been lived well. Caleb listened carefully, noticing something unexpected. Nobody talked about money. Nobody talked about status. Nobody talked about achievements. They talked about character, about impact, about relationships, about love. The realization stayed with him. After the service ended, people slowly drifted outside. Conversations continued beneath a large oak tree near the cemetery. Memories were exchanged. Tears appeared. Laughter occasionally surfaced between the sadness. Life and loss often exist together that way. Caleb eventually noticed Jada standing alone. She wasn't crying. She wasn't speaking. She simply looked thoughtful, distant. He walked over quietly. You okay? Jada smiled weakly, then shook her head, then nodded. The reaction made Caleb laugh softly. Very clear answer. She laughed too. Sorry. No apology needed. For a few moments, they stood together, watching people leave. The wind moved gently through the trees. The afternoon felt unusually still. Then Jada spoke. Funerals always make me think. About what? Her eyes remained fixed ahead. Time. One word. Simple, powerful. Caleb felt it immediately. Jada continued. We spend so much of life acting like we have unlimited time. Neither spoke afterward. The statement didn't require discussion, because it was true, painfully true. People postpone conversations, postpone vacations, postpone forgiveness, postpone relationships, postpone happiness, always believing another opportunity will arrive. Another year, another month, another day. Yet nobody actually knows. The cemetery stretched quietly beyond them. Names carved into stone, entire lifetimes reduced to dates. The sight forced reflection, even for someone as driven as Caleb. Especially for someone as driven as Caleb. His collapse suddenly returned to his mind. The boardroom, the chest pain, the hospital bed, 18 lost hours. A moment that could have become something much worse. For years he had treated life like an endless resource. That illusion no longer existed. Jada glanced toward him. You've been thinking a lot lately. Caleb smiled. Is it that obvious? Very. He laughed softly. The honesty felt refreshing. After a moment, he answered, maybe I'm realizing how many things I pushed aside. Jada remained quiet, allowing him space to continue. Caleb looked toward the horizon. I spent years chasing goals. His voice remained calm, but lately I've started wondering something. What? He thought carefully before answering. Because the question mattered. What if I was measuring success the wrong way? Jada looked at him, really looked at him, not judging, not correcting, just listening. And somehow, that made the question feel even more important. The conversation stayed with Caleb long after the funeral ended, long after he returned home, long after the evening settled across the city, because for the first time in his life, he wasn't asking how much more he could achieve. He was asking something far more difficult: what actually mattered. And although he didn't know it yet, the answer was waiting for him, in a place he hadn't visited in years, connected to a promise he barely remembered making, a promise someone else had never forgotten. The question followed Caleb for days. What actually mattered? Not profit margins, not market share, not magazine covers, not industry awards. What actually mattered? The answer remained frustratingly out of reach. One Saturday afternoon, Caleb found himself driving through an older part of High Point. No meetings, no destination, just a quiet road and too many thoughts. The neighborhoods looked familiar. Many of the houses had been there for decades. Large trees lined the streets. Front porches overlooked small yards. Children played basketball in driveways. People waved to neighbors. Life moved at a slower pace here, the kind of pace Caleb barely noticed anymore. As he drove, something suddenly caught his attention. A house, ordinary, modest, yet instantly recognizable. His foot eased off the accelerator. The car slowed. Memories surfaced immediately. Years ago, he had spent time there, not because of business, not because of work, because of a child whose entire world had changed overnight. Caleb pulled to the side of the road. The house remained exactly where he remembered it. For several moments, he simply stared through the windshield. Images flashed through his mind: a fishing rod, a baseball glove, a small bicycle. Questions, so many questions. Questions no child should ever have to ask. Questions about loss, questions about grief, questions about why certain people never come home. The memories felt unusually vivid, as if they had happened yesterday. Without fully understanding why, Caleb stepped out of the car. The afternoon air felt cool, quiet. The neighborhood seemed almost frozen in time. He walked toward the front porch. Each step awakened another memory: a birthday celebration, a fishing trip, a bedtime story, a promise, although he couldn't quite remember the exact words, only the feeling. By the time he reached the front door, his thoughts were completely occupied by the past. He lifted his hand, preparing to knock. Before his knuckles touched the wood, the front door suddenly flew open. A small figure burst outside. The child nearly collided with him. Both froze. Caleb stared. The boy stared back. For a brief second, neither moved. Then the boy's eyes widened. Pure excitement exploded across his face. The kind of excitement that cannot be faked. The kind that comes from genuine happiness. And before Caleb could react, the boy shouted, "Dad!" The world stopped. Everything, the street, the breeze, the sounds around him, everything seemed to disappear. Caleb blinked, certain he had heard wrong. The boy didn't hesitate. He sprinted forward. Small arms wrapped tightly around Caleb's waist. The force of the hug almost pushed him backward. "Dad!" The boy shouted again. "You came back!" Caleb stood frozen, completely frozen. His mind raced. Confusion collided with disbelief. Nothing made sense. Absolutely nothing. The child squeezed tighter, as though he had been waiting for this moment for years, as though this reunion was perfectly normal, as though there was no reason for surprise at all. Caleb carefully looked down. The boy couldn't have been more than 7 years old now, older than he remembered, taller, yet instantly recognizable. And that realization only deepened the confusion, because Caleb knew exactly who this child was. He remembered him. Years ago, after tragedy had shattered a young life, after grief had arrived far too early, after a little boy had been left asking questions no adult could answer. Caleb remembered all of it. What he didn't remember was why the child had just called him Dad. The front door opened again. Footsteps appeared behind them. Caleb looked up and immediately felt another wave of shock. Jada. She stopped moving. The second she saw them, the second she heard the word that had just been spoken, her expression changed instantly. surprise, concern, disbelief, all arriving at once. The boy finally released his grip, then looked proudly between them, completely unaware of the emotional earthquake he had created. Dad came back. The smile on his face was enormous. Caleb looked toward Jada. Jada looked toward Caleb. Neither spoke. Neither seemed capable of speaking. The silence stretched, long enough to become uncomfortable, long enough for confusion to grow heavier. Finally, Caleb found his voice. Barely. What is happening? The boy laughed, as if the answer should be obvious. Jada slowly stepped forward. Her expression carried something Caleb couldn't immediately identify. Maybe embarrassment, maybe concern, maybe both. The boy grabbed Caleb's hand. His excitement remained endless. I knew you'd come. Caleb stared at him. The words felt strangely familiar, painfully familiar, as though he had heard them before, long ago. He crouched down carefully, trying to understand, trying to make sense of everything. Buddy. The boy smiled instantly, the same smile Caleb remembered, the same smile from fishing trips, the same smile from baseball games, the same smile from years earlier. Then another memory surfaced, a specific memory, one Caleb hadn't thought about in a very long time. The boy sitting beside him on a dock, feet dangling above the water, asking a question, a heartbreaking question, one spoken by a child trying to understand loss. Can you be my dad? The memory hit Caleb like a wave. He remembered it now. Every detail, every word. Back then, he had answered carefully, gently, trying not to hurt the child. I can't replace your dad. The boy had looked disappointed, crushed. Caleb remembered that too. Then he had added something he barely thought about at the time, something intended to comfort, a simple promise. I'll always be here for you. The words echoed through his memory. Suddenly, everything began connecting. The boy had never forgotten, not once. While Caleb moved on with life, while years passed, while businesses grew, while priorities shifted, the child had remembered every word, every promise, every visit, every moment. Children do that, especially when someone makes them feel safe. The realization settled heavily inside Caleb's chest. Jada quietly approached. Her voice remained gentle. He waited. Caleb looked up. What? Jada swallowed. Her eyes softened. He waited for you. The words landed hard, much harder than expected. He talked about you constantly. Caleb couldn't speak. Jada continued. He never forgot. The little boy smiled, proudly, confidently, certain that everything now made perfect sense. To him, this wasn't confusion. This was a reunion he had been expecting for years. The child looked toward the house, excitement suddenly returning. Oh! He gasped, as though he had remembered something important. Then he ran toward the front door. I'll be right back. Before either adult could respond, he disappeared inside. The door slammed shut. Silence returned, this time even heavier than before. Caleb slowly stood, still struggling to process everything, still trying to understand, still trying to catch up with a reality he never saw coming. His eyes met Jada's. What did he mean by waiting? Jada lowered her gaze. For several seconds, she didn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice carried emotion, the kind she had been trying to hide. There are things you need to see. Caleb felt his heartbeat quicken. The front door opened again. The boy reappeared, this time carrying something large, something worn, something carefully protected. A cardboard box, covered with stickers, held like treasure. The child smiled, a huge smile, the kind that comes from finally sharing a secret. Dad, he said proudly, I saved everything. And the moment Caleb saw the box, he realized his life was about to change forever. Before we continue, tell us in the comments, would you have shown up after a divorce the way Jada did? Some people walk away forever. Others continue showing kindness even when nobody is watching. Let us know what you think. And if this story is touching your heart so far, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes in second chances. Because the next chapter changes everything. The cardboard box looked ordinary. That was the strange part. Nothing about it seemed remarkable. No expensive materials, no special markings, just a worn box covered with old stickers. Yet the way the little boy held it made it seem priceless, like treasure, like something important. The child carefully carried it down the porch steps. His excitement was impossible to miss. Meanwhile, Caleb stood completely still. Every instinct told him this box mattered. A lot. The little boy sat on the porch and placed the box between them. Then he smiled proudly. "I kept everything." Caleb glanced toward Jada. She remained quiet. Her expression suggested she already knew what was inside. The little boy immediately opened the box. Inside sat years of memories, neatly organized, carefully protected, saved one piece at a time. Caleb slowly lowered himself onto the porch beside him. His heartbeat felt unusually heavy. The child reached inside and pulled out the first drawing. Construction paper, crayon marks, a little faded around the edges. The drawing showed two people standing beside a lake. One was clearly a child. The other was clearly an adult. Above them were the words, "Me and Dad fishing." Caleb stared. His throat tightened. The little boy smiled. "I made that when I was 5. Carefully, he reached for another drawing. This one showed a baseball field. The same two figures appeared again. One small, one tall, both smiling. Again, the title sat at the top, "Me and Dad." The child kept going, one drawing after another. Fishing trips, baseball games, birthday cakes, family dinners, holiday decorations. Every picture told a story. Every picture carried the same message. The little boy had never stopped thinking about him, not once. Caleb slowly took one of the drawings into his hands. The paper felt fragile, yet somehow the emotions attached to it felt overwhelming. "You saved all these?" The boy looked confused by the question. "Of course." As if there could be no other answer, as if saving them had always been the plan. The child reached into the box again. This time he removed several folded cards, birthday cards, homemade, colorful, decorated with stickers. The first one read, "Happy birthday, Dad." Caleb blinked, slowly opening it. Inside, uneven handwriting filled the page. "I hope you have a good birthday. I miss you. Love you." For several seconds, he couldn't move. The words were simple, childlike, honest, and somehow they hurt more than anything else. The little boy continued sorting through the collection. "I made one every year." Every year, the words echoed through Caleb's mind. Every year, birthdays, Christmases, school milestones, achievements, moments. The child had marked all of them, waiting, believing, holding on to a promise. Another stack appeared. School photographs, dozens of them, each year carefully organized. The youngest photographs showed a little boy barely tall enough to sit properly. Then year by year, he grew. A little taller, a little older, a little more confident. The progression was impossible to ignore. Caleb wasn't looking at photographs. He was looking at years, years he had missed, years he never realized were passing. The child pointed at one picture. That was first grade. Then another. That was second grade. Then another. That one was picture day. The smile on his face remained constant. Proud, excited, happy to share. Caleb felt something painful settling inside his chest. Because each photograph represented time, and time was the one thing nobody could get back. The little boy suddenly reached toward the bottom of the box. His expression brightened even more. "I want to show you my favorite." He pulled out a folded piece of paper, older than the others, worn from being opened and closed countless times. The child carefully handed it over. Caleb unfolded it. A letter, written years ago, in large, uneven handwriting. "Dear Dad, today, I learned how to ride my bike. I fell 2 times, but I got better. I hope you come see me soon. Love, me." Caleb stared at the page, unable to speak. The little boy smiled. "I kept that one because I thought you'd like it." For a moment, nobody spoke. Not Caleb, not Jada, not the child. The silence carried too much emotion. Finally, Caleb looked up. His eyes moved toward Jada. She was watching quietly, not interrupting, not explaining, simply allowing him to experience it. The little boy reached into the box once more. This time he removed a small stack of school certificates, reading awards, attendance awards, academic achievements, each one carefully protected, each one saved, each one waiting for the same person, waiting for Caleb. I wanted to show you all of them. The child's voice carried genuine excitement, not resentment, not anger, excitement. That realization nearly broke Caleb's heart, because the child wasn't focused on what had been missed. He was focused on what could still be shared. That kind of hope felt almost impossible, yet there it was, sitting right beside him. The little boy carefully closed the box, then rested both hands on top of it. A satisfied smile crossed his face. See? Caleb swallowed hard. Yeah. The child nodded. I knew you'd come back. Those words landed differently this time, not as a greeting, not as excitement, as a belief that had survived years, a belief protected inside every drawing, every card, every photograph, every message, every memory. And sitting there on that porch, staring at the box resting between them, Caleb realized something he had never understood before. Someone had been saving a place for him in their life, year after year, without giving up, without forgetting, without stopping. And he suddenly understood why Jada had looked emotional when the box appeared. Because this wasn't a collection of paper. It was proof that one small promise had mattered far more than he ever imagined. The porch remained quiet after the box was closed. The little boy sat smiling beside it, completely satisfied, as though he had just shared something wonderful, as though he had no idea what he had placed on Caleb's shoulders. The late afternoon sun stretched across the yard. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower started. A dog barked. Life continued normally, yet Caleb felt completely different, because he couldn't stop thinking about one thing. Every drawing, every card, every photograph, every birthday message, every school certificate, they all carried the same message. Someone had been waiting, not for weeks, not for months, for years. The little boy suddenly stood. I'm hungry. Jada laughed softly. That's a surprise. I'm always hungry. That part is definitely true. The child grabbed the box, carefully, protectively, then disappeared into the house. The moment the door closed behind him, silence returned, a heavier silence, the kind adults recognize immediately, the kind that signals an important conversation. Caleb slowly looked toward Jada. Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally, he broke the silence. Why didn't you tell me? Jada looked down, her fingers folded together, then unfolded again, a small sign of nervousness. He needed stability. Caleb frowned. What does that mean? She took a slow breath. After you stopped coming around. The sentence trailed away, not because she didn't know what to say, because she was choosing her words carefully. Caleb felt his stomach tighten. Jada finally continued. He took it hard. The words landed softly, yet they carried weight, a lot of weight. Caleb looked away, because part of him already knew. The evidence had been sitting inside that box. He kept asking about you. Jada's voice remained calm. He thought you'd come back. Another pause. He believed it for a long time. Caleb swallowed. A feeling he hadn't experienced in years settled inside his chest. Not embarrassment, not disappointment, responsibility, real responsibility, the kind that can't be delegated, the kind that can't be avoided, the kind that follows a person home. Jada looked toward the front door. He never blamed you. That somehow made it worse, much worse, because anger would have been easier to understand. Anger would have made sense. Instead, the little boy had continued believing, continued hoping, continued saving memories. Continued waiting. Jada sighed softly. Every birthday, he made a card. Caleb closed his eyes. He had already seen them. The stack felt impossible to forget. Every Christmas he asked if you might visit. Another pause. Every major event at school. Another, he wanted to tell you about it. The porch suddenly felt very small. Caleb stared toward the yard, trying to process everything, trying to understand how a promise he barely remembered had become so important. Because the truth was uncomfortable. He never intentionally abandoned the child. Life simply moved faster. Work became overwhelming. Responsibilities increased. One commitment became 10, then 20, then 50. Months passed, then years. And somewhere during all that movement, a little boy had been left behind, not intentionally, but the result was the same. Intentions don't always erase consequences, especially where children are concerned. The front door opened. The little boy stepped outside again, holding a sandwich. Apparently, his emergency hunger situation had already been resolved. Neither adult mentioned their conversation. Neither wanted him carrying that burden. Instead, Caleb spent another hour talking with him, listening, learning. The little boy spoke about school, sports, friends, teachers, favorite movies, future dreams, normal childhood things. Yet beneath every conversation, Caleb noticed something. The child paid attention to everything he said, every word, every reaction, every expression, as if Caleb's presence mattered far more than he realized. That realization followed him all the way home, and it stayed there. The first night was difficult. Sleep refused to come. Caleb lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The memory box replayed endlessly, drawing after drawing, card after card, year after year. At 2 o'clock in the morning, he sat up. At 3 o'clock, he walked through the house. At 4 o'clock, he found himself standing in the kitchen, holding a glass of water. The mansion felt quieter than ever. For years he had considered silence peaceful. Now it felt different. Now it felt empty, because his thoughts kept returning to a small cardboard box. The second night wasn't much better. Neither was the third. By the end of the week, exhaustion had returned. Not physical exhaustion, emotional exhaustion. The kind created by difficult truths. The kind created by self-reflection. The kind that arrives when a person is finally honest with themselves. One evening, Caleb sat alone in his office. The same office where countless business decisions had been made. The same office where company strategies had been developed. The same office where he built a fortune, yet none of those accomplishments occupied his thoughts. Instead, he found himself staring at an old family photograph. A photograph he hadn't looked at in years. Him, Jada, a different chapter of life, a different version of himself. For a long moment, he simply stared. Then he leaned back in his chair. A difficult realization slowly formed. For years he had measured success by growth, revenue growth, business growth, financial growth, professional growth, always more, always the next goal, the next target, the next achievement. But lately, another question kept appearing. What good was success if it came at the cost of presence? The question refused to leave. It followed him through meetings, through phone calls, through quiet evenings, because, for the first time, Caleb wasn't evaluating his life through the lens of achievement. He was evaluating it through the lens of impact. And those are very different things. One weekend, he drove past a baseball field. Children were practicing. Parents watched from the bleachers. Coaches shouted encouragement. The scene lasted only a few seconds. Yet, it stayed with him, because suddenly he wondered how many moments like that he had missed. How many games, how many celebrations, how many ordinary memories. The kind people rarely appreciate until they're gone. By the time he returned home, something had changed. Not dramatically, not overnight, but enough. Enough for him to understand that regret alone wasn't useful. Regret changes nothing. Action does. And for the first time since seeing that memory box, Caleb stopped asking himself what he had missed. Instead, he began asking a different question. What could he still become? Because somewhere inside him, a decision was beginning to form. A quiet decision. One that would soon change everything. Not only for him, but for a little boy who had never stopped believing in a promise. The following Saturday morning, Caleb received a text message. It was from Jada. Short, direct. Exactly the way she always texted. Baseball game. 10 o'clock. He expects you there. Caleb stared at the message, then smiled. No greeting, no explanation, no room for negotiation, just information. And somehow, he already knew she had written it that way on purpose. A second message appeared. Don't be late. Caleb laughed. For the first time in days, the weight on his shoulders felt slightly lighter. A few minutes later, he typed a response. I'll be there. The reply arrived immediately. We'll see. Caleb shook his head. Some things clearly hadn't changed. The baseball field sat on the edge of town. Parents occupied folding chairs. Children ran across the grass. Coaches attempted to maintain order. The effort wasn't going particularly well. One child was chasing a butterfly. Another had somehow lost a shoe. A third appeared more interested in snacks than baseball. Pure chaos. The beautiful kind. Caleb arrived 15 minutes early. For someone who built companies, arriving early wasn't unusual. Yet today felt different. Today, he wasn't preparing for a board meeting. He wasn't negotiating a deal. He wasn't presenting to investors. Today, he simply didn't want to disappoint someone. The moment the little boy spotted him, his entire face lit up. Dad! The word still surprised Caleb every time. The child sprinted across the field, nearly tripping over his own feet, then launched himself directly into Caleb. You came! Caleb laughed. I said I would. The little boy grinned, then pointed toward the bleachers. Good. What? The child lowered his voice dramatically. Mom bet $5 you'd be late. From across the field, Jada nearly dropped her coffee. Caleb stared. You bet against me? Jada shrugged. No confidence. Wow. History supported my decision. The little boy laughed so hard he bent forward. Caleb couldn't help laughing too. For several minutes, they stood together talking before the game started. Nothing important, nothing life-changing. Just normal conversation. The kind people rarely appreciate while it's happening. The game itself was a disaster. At least from a baseball perspective. Children ran in the wrong direction. Several forgot where they were supposed to stand. One player celebrated after striking out. Another waved at passing traffic during the middle of an inning. The little boy somehow managed to spend 3 minutes talking to a teammate while standing on base. Nobody seemed concerned. Least of all the children. By the end of the game, everyone received juice boxes. Everyone considered the day a success. Caleb noticed something as they walked toward the parking lot. The little boy kept looking over his shoulder, checking, making sure Caleb was still there. The realization settled quietly inside him. The child wasn't taking his presence for granted. Not yet. Trust takes time, especially when someone has been absent. The baseball game became the first of many weekends. Then came another, then another. Slowly, a routine started forming. Not because anyone planned it, because it happened naturally. Some Saturdays involved sports. Other Saturdays involved fishing. Sometimes they simply spent time together. The little boy talked constantly about school, about favorite movies, about future plans, about things that seemed incredibly important to 7-year-olds. And Caleb listened, really listened. One afternoon they sat beside a small lake, holding fishing rods. The little boy's attention shifted constantly. Fish, birds, clouds, boats, anything moving. At one point, he pointed toward the water. Did you catch anything? Caleb looked at his empty fishing line. No. The child nodded seriously. Me neither. Several seconds passed. Then the boy smiled. I think we're both bad at this. Caleb burst out laughing. The child joined him immediately. The fish remained unimpressed. Weeks passed. The visits continued. One evening, Jada called. He has a school presentation tomorrow. Caleb immediately answered, I'll be there. The response surprised even him, because years ago, he would have checked his calendar first. Now he checked nothing. The next day, he arrived 20 minutes early. The little boy noticed immediately. The smile that crossed his face was impossible to miss. After the presentation ended, children rushed toward their families. The little boy ran straight toward Caleb. Did you see it? I saw all of it. The volcano worked. It definitely worked. The teacher liked it. She did. The child grinned, proud, confident, happy, and for some reason, Caleb felt proud too, as though he had personally contributed to the volcano, which made absolutely no sense, yet the feeling remained. As months passed, the little boy gradually changed. The difference wasn't dramatic, just noticeable. He seemed more confident, more relaxed, more secure. Jada noticed it first. One evening she stood in the kitchen, watching the little boy finish homework. Then she looked toward Caleb. "He's happier." The words caught him off guard. Jada smiled softly. "You should know that." For a moment, neither spoke. The compliment carried more meaning than she realized. Because for years, Caleb's success had been measured in numbers, revenue, growth, profit, performance. Now somebody was telling him he had positively impacted a child, and somehow that mattered more. The small moments became the important moments. Homework sessions, movie nights, fishing trips, baseball practices, school projects, conversations during car rides, the ordinary things. The things Caleb once overlooked, the things he now valued most. One rainy afternoon, they attempted to build a model airplane together. 3 hours later, the airplane looked completely hopeless. The little boy stared at it. Caleb stared at it. Jada walked into the room, then immediately started laughing. "What happened?" The little boy pointed at Caleb. "He was helping." Caleb looked offended. "Excuse me? You made it worse." "I absolutely did not." The child folded his arms. "You glued your sleeve to the table." Jada laughed harder. Caleb sighed. "That happened one time. It happened today." The little boy's laughter filled the room. Soon, all three of them were laughing. The airplane never recovered. Nobody cared. Because the memory was better anyway. That night, after everyone else had gone to sleep, Caleb sat alone on his back porch. The evening air felt cool, peaceful. For a long time he simply sat there thinking, not about business, not about money, not about expansion plans. Instead, he thought about baseball games, science projects, fishing trips, school presentations, a little boy's excitement every time he showed up. The realization arrived quietly, so quietly he almost missed it. For months he had focused on becoming more present, more reliable, more involved, but somewhere along the way, something unexpected had happened. The visits no longer felt like obligations. The conversations no longer felt like efforts. The weekends no longer felt like commitments. They felt natural. They felt important. They felt right. Caleb leaned back in his chair, staring toward the night sky, and for the first time, a thought entered his mind that he wasn't prepared for. Not a business goal, not a financial objective. Something much deeper, something much more personal, a feeling, a realization, a truth. Because somewhere between the baseball games, the fishing trips, the school activities, and the laughter, Caleb had stopped feeling like a visitor and started feeling like a father. The thought both terrified him and filled him with hope, because deep down, he knew one thing. Everything was changing, and this time, he didn't want it to stop. The realization stayed with Caleb for days. He couldn't stop thinking about it. Not because it frightened him, because it felt true. For months he had focused on showing up. Now showing up had become part of his life. The change happened so gradually, he almost missed it. One weekend became another, then another, until eventually nobody questioned whether Caleb would be there. His presence stopped being a surprise. It became expected, and strangely enough, that was exactly what he wanted. One Saturday afternoon, Caleb found himself sitting at Jada's dining room table surrounded by construction paper, glue sticks, markers, and complete confusion. The little boy sat across from him, focused, determined. Jada stood nearby, trying very hard not to laugh. "It's not funny," Caleb said. "It absolutely is." The little boy pointed toward the table. "We're making a solar system." Caleb stared at the collection of supplies. "It looks impossible." The child sighed dramatically. "That's because you're doing it wrong." Jada immediately turned away. Her shoulders started shaking. She was laughing. Caleb looked offended. "Excuse me?" The little boy nodded seriously. You glued Mars to Saturn. Caleb looked down. Unfortunately, the accusation was accurate. Jada laughed harder. The child laughed. Even Caleb eventually joined them. For nearly 3 hours they worked on the project. Some planets ended up crooked. Several labels were attached incorrectly. At one point, Caleb accidentally glued part of his sleeve to the table. The little boy considered that the funniest moment of the entire day. The project wasn't perfect. Nobody cared, because the memories being created mattered more. As the afternoon ended, the little boy proudly held up the finished display. We did it. Caleb smiled. No. The child looked confused. No? We did it. The little boy grinned. That answer clearly meant something, more than Caleb realized, more than either of them said out loud, because children notice partnership, children notice effort, children notice who stays, and Caleb was staying. Over the following months, routines developed naturally. Friday phone calls, Saturday activities, Sunday dinners, school events, homework sessions, small traditions formed without anyone planning them. The little boy began calling Caleb whenever something important happened. A good grade, a baseball victory, a funny classroom story. One evening, Caleb answered his phone while leaving a business meeting. The little boy sounded excited. Guess what? What? I got an A. Caleb smiled immediately. That's amazing. There was a brief pause. Then the child asked the question he had clearly been waiting to ask. Are you proud of me? The words stopped Caleb cold. People had asked him many questions throughout his life. Investors, executives, reporters. None affected him like that one. His answer came instantly. Very proud. The little boy's excitement practically exploded through the phone. Caleb stood motionless for several seconds after the call ended, because some moments reveal what matters, and that had been one of them. His relationship with Jada changed too, not dramatically, not overnight. The change arrived through ordinary moments. Conversations while cleaning up after dinner, discussions during school events, shared laughter, shared responsibilities. Trust slowly returned, one piece at a time. Neither forced it, neither rushed it. Both understood that some things take time. One evening they found themselves washing dishes together after dinner. The little boy was upstairs finishing homework. For several minutes, neither spoke. The quiet felt comfortable. Jada handed him a plate. Caleb dried it. Simple, ordinary, yet somehow meaningful. Finally, Jada broke the silence. You've changed. Caleb glanced toward her. Good change or bad change? Good. He smiled slightly. I'll take that. Jada continued rinsing dishes. I wasn't sure this would happen. What? She looked toward the stairs. This. Caleb followed her gaze. The house, the routine, the laughter, the growing sense of stability. He understood immediately. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then Caleb answered honestly. Neither was I. Jada smiled. A genuine smile. The kind that reached her eyes. The kind he remembered. The little boy noticed the changes too. Children always do. One evening during dinner, he looked back and forth between them, studying them, analyzing them, which immediately made both adults nervous. What? The child grinned. Nothing. That answer made things worse. Jada narrowed her eyes. What are you thinking? The little boy smiled wider, still saying nothing. Caleb immediately recognized the expression. The child knew something, or thought he knew something. Either way, he was enjoying himself. Finally, he shrugged. You guys, smile more now. Silence. Jada froze. Caleb nearly dropped his fork. The little boy returned to eating, completely satisfied with the chaos he had created. Several seconds passed. Then Jada started laughing. Caleb laughed too, because arguing would only make it worse. And somehow, the child knew that, as autumn slowly gave way to winter, something important happened. Not one large moment, many small moments. The kind people overlook while they're happening. Movie nights, homework battles, family dinners, school events, birthday planning, weekend trips, shared responsibilities, shared memories. shared lives. For the first time in years, Caleb no longer felt like he was visiting someone else's world. He felt connected to it, part of it, included in it. And that feeling changed him more than any business success ever had. Because somewhere between the science projects, the laughter, the routines, and the growing trust, a family had quietly started forming, not through paperwork, not through obligation, through consistency, through care, through showing up, day after day, week after week, choice after choice. And neither Caleb nor Jada fully realized it yet. But those ordinary days were about to be tested by something neither of them expected, something powerful enough to change everything once again. The fundraiser took place on a chilly Friday evening. By 6 o'clock, the community center was filled with people. Families moved between tables. Volunteers organized donation baskets. Children ran through the hallways, despite repeated instructions not to. The atmosphere felt lively, warm, comfortable. Exactly the kind of event Jada loved. And exactly the kind of event Caleb would have avoided a year earlier. Not because he disliked people, because he never believed he had time. Now he understood differently. Time wasn't something you found. It was something you made. And lately, he had been making it. The moment Caleb entered the building, he spotted Jada across the room. She was helping organize auction items. Focused, busy, completely unaware that he had arrived. For a moment, he simply watched, not because she was doing anything extraordinary, because she looked happy, genuinely happy. There was something peaceful about that, something he hadn't fully appreciated years ago. Then Jada looked up. Their eyes met. A smile immediately appeared on her face, automatic, unforced, and Caleb realized his own smile had appeared just as quickly. The little boy noticed both reactions instantly. Unfortunately, his grin widened, dangerously. Caleb immediately recognized that expression. The child was about to cause problems. Sure enough, he walked directly toward them, looking entirely too pleased with himself. You both smiled at the same time. Jada froze. Caleb closed his eyes. The little boy nodded confidently. Exactly the same time. Neither adult responded. The child looked delighted. Then he casually walked away. Mission accomplished. Jada covered her face. Caleb laughed. He's enjoying this. Far too much. Definitely. The awkwardness lasted several seconds. Then both started laughing. Because honestly, there wasn't much else they could do. As the evening continued, volunteers gradually completed their work. Tables were arranged. Decorations were finished. Auction items were organized. Eventually, most people moved into the main hall, leaving only a handful of volunteers cleaning up, including Caleb and Jada. The little boy had joined a group activity on the other side of the building. For the first time all evening, Caleb and Jada found themselves alone. The room felt quieter, not silent, just quieter. Jada carried a stack of folders toward a storage cabinet. Caleb followed with several boxes. Neither spoke for a while. The comfortable kind of silence had returned. Then suddenly Jada laughed. The sound echoed through the nearly empty room. Caleb looked over. What? She shook her head. No. What? I'm not telling you. That answer guaranteed he wasn't letting it go. What? Jada laughed again. Finally she surrendered. I remembered the dancing. Caleb immediately groaned. Oh no. Oh yes. Not this story. Absolutely this story. She leaned against the table, smiling. You were terrible. I wasn't terrible. You were a safety hazard. Caleb pointed toward her. That's exaggerated. It isn't. It is. Jada shook her head. I genuinely worried someone might get injured. Caleb laughed despite himself. The memory returned instantly. Years ago, a wedding, a crowded dance floor, and his complete inability to follow basic rhythm. Jada was still laughing. You stepped on my foot 6 times. That number keeps increasing. Because the trauma remains fresh. Caleb laughed harder. For a few moments, they simply enjoyed the memory. The way people do when enough time has passed. The way people do when old pain no longer dominates every memory. Eventually, the laughter faded. Something quieter replaced it. Neither seemed eager to break the moment. The distance between them felt smaller now, not physically, emotionally. Years earlier, conversations had become difficult. Now they seemed effortless. That difference mattered. A lot. Jada slowly folded her arms. Her expression softened. "Can I tell you something?" Caleb nodded. "Of course." She hesitated. The hesitation alone told him this wasn't going to be a joke, or a story, or casual conversation. This mattered. Finally, she spoke. "When you collapsed." The words stopped. Briefly, Caleb listened. "When I got the call, I was terrified." The honesty caught him off guard. Jada looked away, as though admitting it made her uncomfortable. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she continued, "I thought I had more time." The words landed heavily, because he knew exactly what she meant. The funeral conversation returned to his mind. Time. The thing everyone assumes exists in unlimited supply. Until suddenly, it doesn't. Jada exhaled slowly. "I spent 2 years convincing myself I was okay." A small, sad smile appeared. Then that phone call happened. Caleb remained silent, allowing her to continue. "Seeing you in that hospital bed made me realize something." She looked directly at him now. Something vulnerable existed in her eyes. Something honest. "I never stopped caring." The room seemed smaller. Caleb felt his heartbeat quicken. Not because he was surprised, because hearing the words made them real. For several seconds, he couldn't answer. Not because he didn't know what to say, because too many things wanted to be said at once. Finally, he spoke. Quietly. "I never stopped caring either." Neither looked away. Neither tried to hide. For the first time in years, there was no distance, no walls, no pretending, just truth. Simple truth. The kind people spend years avoiding. The kind that changes everything when finally spoken. Jada smiled. A small smile, yet one filled with emotion. Relief. Hope. Maybe both. Footsteps suddenly echoed through the hallway. The little boy appeared, saving them from having to process the moment immediately. Or perhaps delaying the inevitable. Either way, he arrived smiling. "Ready?" Jada blinked. "Ready for what?" "The drive home." "Oh." The little boy looked back and forth between them, studying both faces, analyzing. Again, his smile slowly widened. Caleb immediately recognized trouble. "What?" The child shrugged. "Nothing." That answer was never reassuring. Jada laughed. The little boy looked extremely pleased with himself. Once again. As they walked toward the parking lot together, something had clearly changed. Not dramatically, not officially, but undeniably. The trust that had once been broken was rebuilding. Slowly, patiently, one conversation at a time. One act of consistency at a time. One honest moment at a time. And for the first time since their divorce, neither seemed afraid of where that path might lead. Before we continue, tell us in the comments, do you think Caleb deserves a second chance? After everything that happened, after the mistakes, after the years apart, do you believe people can truly change? Let us know below. And if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes in redemption, loyalty, and the power of showing up when it matters most, because Caleb's biggest test is still ahead of him, and it will force him to choose between the life he built and the people he loves. The phone call arrived 3 days later. Caleb was leaving his office when his assistant informed him that the board wanted an emergency meeting. Not tomorrow, not next week. Immediately, the request alone felt unusual. Over the years, Caleb had learned to recognize urgency, and this carried it. By the following morning, he sat inside the same boardroom where his collapse had changed everything months earlier. The room looked exactly the same. The polished table, the presentation screens, the city visible through the glass walls. Everything familiar. Yet Caleb felt different. The man sitting there now wasn't the same man who had collapsed. That much was obvious. Board members filled their seats. Executives exchanged quiet conversations. Lawyers reviewed documents. An unusual level of excitement hung in the room. Several people were smiling before the meeting even started. That immediately caught Caleb's attention. Something major was happening. A senior board member stood. "We appreciate everyone coming in on short notice." The presentation screen illuminated. Charts appeared. Graphs, financial projections, international market analysis. Caleb's attention sharpened immediately. Now he understood. This wasn't a routine meeting, not even close. The presentation continued. Numbers flashed across the screen. Projected growth, global expansion, revenue forecasts, market penetration opportunities. Every statistic looked larger than the one before it. Finally, the explanation arrived. An international corporation wanted a merger, not a partnership, not a joint venture, a full-scale merger, the kind that appears once in a generation, the kind executives spend entire careers chasing. The room practically vibrated with excitement. One board member leaned forward. "If completed, this becomes the largest transaction in company history." Another nodded. "It changes everything." Caleb remained silent, listening, watching, evaluating. The presentation continued for nearly an hour. Every detail pointed toward the same conclusion. Financially, it was brilliant. Professionally, it was historic. Strategically, it was almost impossible to reject. When the presentation finally ended, applause broke out. Actual applause. That alone said a lot, because boardrooms rarely applauded. One executive smiled directly at Caleb. "Congratulations." Several others quickly agreed. "You built the company to this point. This is the next level. This is the opportunity of a lifetime." The praise continued. Yet something felt strange. Caleb wasn't experiencing the excitement everyone expected. He wasn't celebrating. He wasn't imagining headlines. He wasn't calculating personal wealth. Instead, he felt oddly disconnected from the room, as though everyone else was watching one movie while he was watching another. Eventually, he asked the obvious question, "What would my role be?" Several people smiled. Clearly, they had anticipated the question. A new slide appeared. The answer arrived immediately, and everything changed. The merger required leadership consolidation, a global executive structure, international oversight, a permanent transition, one location, one headquarters, one leadership team, overseas, permanently. The room grew quiet. Caleb stared at the screen. Certain words stood out immediately. Permanent relocation, long-term leadership assignment, international headquarters. No ambiguity, no misunderstanding. The expectation was clear. If he accepted the merger, he would leave. Not for a few weeks, not for a few months. For the foreseeable future, the board waited, watching him, expecting excitement, expecting gratitude, expecting celebration. Instead, Caleb felt something completely different. The first image entering his mind wasn't the company. It wasn't the merger. It wasn't the money. It was a baseball field. A little boy running toward him. "Dad!" The memory appeared instantly. Then another, a school presentation, a science project, family dinners, movie nights, fishing trips, ordinary moments, the kinds of moments he once ignored, the kinds of moments he now valued most. The board continued discussing details, yet Caleb barely heard them, because another realization had arrived. A year earlier, this decision would have been easy. A year earlier, he would have accepted before the presentation ended. No hesitation, no doubts, no questions. Now everything felt different. The meeting eventually concluded. The board gave him time to decide. Not much time, but some. As people filed out of the room, several executives stopped to congratulate him again. Each one assumed the same thing, that acceptance was inevitable. After all, who walks away from an opportunity like this? Who says no to history? Who turns down the biggest professional achievement of their life? By the time Caleb reached the parking garage, the question followed him. The drive home felt longer than usual. His thoughts refused to settle. Every argument in favor of the merger made sense. Every business reason was logical. Every financial projection was impressive. Yet none of those things brought clarity. That evening, he sat alone in his office at home. The proposal rested on the desk. The numbers were staggering, life-changing, legacy-defining. the sort of opportunity people spend decades pursuing. Still, he couldn't stop thinking about something else. People, not numbers. People, Jada, the little boy, his mother, the life he had slowly rebuilt, the life he nearly lost. The realization stayed with him long into the night, and it remained there throughout the following week. The pressure increased daily. Board members called, investors called, industry leaders called. Everyone wanted an answer. Everyone assumed they already knew what it would be. Meanwhile, Caleb found himself increasingly distracted, not by business, by uncertainty, because for the first time in his life, the most important decision before him wasn't purely professional. It was personal, deeply personal. That Saturday, he joined the little boy beside a lake. Fishing rods rested nearby. The water moved gently beneath the afternoon sun. For several minutes, neither spoke. The peaceful silence felt familiar, comfortable. Then the little boy looked over, his expression unusually serious. "Can I ask you something?" Caleb smiled. "Of course." The child hesitated, a rare thing for him. Usually, words arrived at full speed. Not this time. He stared toward the water, then quietly asked, "Are you leaving?" The question immediately tightened something inside Caleb's chest. He looked over. The little boy avoided eye contact. Still watching the lake, still waiting. "Who told you that?" The child shrugged. "I heard people talking." Silence followed, heavy silence, the kind that makes answers difficult. The little boy finally turned toward him, his voice softer now, much softer. "If you go." Another pause, a longer one, then the question that changed everything. "Will you come back?" The words hung between them, and for the first time since the merger was proposed, Caleb understood exactly what was at stake. The question lingered over the lake. Simple, quiet, devastating. "If you go, will you come back?" The little boy stared at the water after asking it, as though he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to hear the answer. Caleb sat motionless beside him. The fishing rods rested untouched. The breeze moved gently across the lake, yet none of it mattered, because everything had suddenly become crystal clear. The little boy wasn't asking about business. He wasn't asking about travel. He wasn't asking about corporate opportunities. He was asking something much deeper. "Can I trust you?" The realization landed heavily, because Caleb recognized the fear hidden inside the question. The child had experienced loss before, real loss, life-changing loss, and somewhere deep inside him remained the fear that people eventually leave, even the people who matter, especially the people who matter. Caleb looked down at his hands. For months, he had been rebuilding trust, one weekend at a time, one promise at a time, one baseball game, one school event, one conversation. Trust wasn't built through speeches, it was built through consistency. And now that trust stood in front of him, asking the most important question of all: "Will you stay?" The little boy finally looked over. His expression carried something Caleb had rarely seen before: worry, real worry. The kind children try to hide, the kind adults often pretend not to notice. But Caleb noticed, because he had changed. A year ago, he might have missed it. Today, he couldn't. For several seconds, he searched for words, not business words, not polished words, just honest ones. Finally, he spoke. "I don't know exactly what happens next." The little boy listened carefully. "But I know something." "What?" Caleb held his gaze. "I care about being here." The child remained silent, waiting. So Caleb continued, "I care about you." The words came naturally, without hesitation, without calculation, because they were true. The little boy's eyes widened slightly. Caleb smiled. "And that means any decision I make has to include you." The child didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked back toward the water, thinking, processing. Then finally he nodded, not completely reassured, but reassured enough. For now, the conversation shifted afterward, back to fishing, back to ordinary things. Yet Caleb barely heard any of it, because something important had happened. The merger proposal was no longer a business decision. Now it was personal. deeply personal. That evening, Caleb drove home alone. The road seemed unusually quiet. Streetlights passed one after another. His thoughts remained fixed on the same question: success. For years he had defined it one way: growth, achievement, expansion, recognition. Every major decision followed that formula. Every goal pointed in the same direction: more, always more. Yet the last year had challenged everything he believed. The hospital, Jada, the little boy, the memories, the routines, the family slowly forming around him. None of those things appeared on financial statements. None could be measured through quarterly reports. Yet somehow, they mattered more. The realization became impossible to ignore. By the time he reached home, he already knew he wouldn't be sleeping much. He was right. Hours passed. The house remained dark. Caleb sat alone in his office. The merger proposal rested on his desk. Its numbers were staggering. The type of opportunity people spend entire careers pursuing. Most executives never receive an offer like this. Many would sacrifice almost anything for it. Caleb understood that better than anyone, because years earlier, he would have been one of them. Without question, without hesitation, without doubt. But something had changed. Or perhaps someone had changed. The man sitting behind that desk wasn't the same man who collapsed in the boardroom. That version of Caleb believed achievement could solve loneliness. This version knew better. His eyes drifted toward a photograph sitting on a nearby shelf. Not a business award, not a company achievement. A photograph. One taken after a baseball game. The little boy smiling, Jada laughing. A perfectly ordinary moment. Yet it immediately captured his attention, because it represented something money never purchased. Belonging. The word settled inside him. Belonging. People spend years chasing success, sometimes entire lifetimes, yet very few people find belonging, real belonging, the kind that waits for you, the kind that welcomes you, the kind that trusts you. Caleb leaned back in his chair. For the first time in weeks, the conflict inside him began fading, not because the choice became easier, because it became clearer. Those are different things. Some decisions remain painful, even when they're obvious. This was one of them. The following morning, Caleb visited his mother. They sat together on her porch, drinking coffee. The conversation wandered through ordinary topics: health, neighbors, weather, life. Eventually, she noticed something. "You've been thinking." Caleb laughed softly. "That obvious?" "Very." He shook his head. Some things never changed. His mother studied him for a moment, then asked the question directly. "What's wrong?" Caleb explained everything. The merger, the relocation, the expectations, the pressure. She listened quietly, interrupting only once to refill their coffee. When he finally finished, silence settled between them. His mother stared toward the yard, then smiled. A small, knowing smile. "What?" She looked at him. "When you were younger, every decision was easy." Caleb frowned. "What does that mean?" "You always chose ambition." The honesty made him laugh. "Because it was true." His mother continued. "Now you're choosing between ambition and people." The statement hit harder than expected, not because it was cruel, because it was accurate. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then his mother reached over and squeezed his hand. A simple gesture, one filled with understanding. "You already know your answer." Caleb stared at her and realized she was right. He did know. He had known since the lake. Maybe even before. He simply hadn't been ready to admit it. By the time he left her house that afternoon, the uncertainty was gone. Not the consequences, not the difficulty, just the uncertainty. The choice had finally become clear. And for the first time in his life, Caleb wasn't choosing the biggest opportunity. He was choosing the most important one. The man he wanted to become. 3 days later, Caleb walked into the boardroom. The same boardroom, the same polished table, the same floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, the same executives, the same investors, the same people who believed they already knew what he was going to say. Nobody expected a surprise. Why would they? The merger was too good, too profitable, too historic, too important. At least, that was how everyone saw it. The room buzzed with confidence. Several board members smiled as Caleb entered. One executive even gave him a thumbs up, as though the decision had already been made, as though today's meeting was simply a formality. Caleb took his seat. Calm, focused, certain. The uncertainty that had followed him for weeks was gone. Now there was only clarity. The chairman opened the meeting. "We appreciate everyone being here." A few brief introductions followed. Then attention shifted toward Caleb. Every eye in the room settled on him. Waiting, expecting, assuming. The chairman smiled. "Have you reached a decision?" The room became completely silent. Caleb looked around the table. Some faces appeared excited. Others appeared confident. A few looked almost celebratory. Nobody seemed worried. Nobody expected disappointment. Finally, Caleb nodded. "Yes." Several people smiled immediately. One executive leaned back in his chair, clearly relieved. Another quietly whispered something to a colleague. They all thought they knew what was coming. Then Caleb spoke. "I'm declining the merger." Silence. Instant silence. The kind that arrives so suddenly, it almost feels physical. Nobody moved. Nobody reacted. Nobody seemed entirely sure they heard him correctly. Several seconds passed. One executive actually laughed, a short, confused laugh. Certain, it had to be a joke. Caleb wasn't joking. The smile disappeared. The room remained frozen. Finally, someone spoke. "What?" The single word captured exactly what everyone else was thinking. Caleb remained calm. "I'm declining the merger." The silence somehow became even heavier. One board member removed his glasses. Another stared down at the presentation documents. A third looked genuinely shocked. For years, these people had watched Caleb pursue growth with relentless determination. Now he was walking away from the biggest opportunity of his career. Nothing about it made sense to them. One executive leaned forward. "Do you understand what you're turning down?" Caleb nodded. "Yes." "The financial impact alone is—" "I understand." "The global expansion—" "I understand." "The market advantages—" "I understand." The executive stopped talking, because the problem wasn't misunderstanding. The problem was disagreement. A board member finally asked the question everyone wanted answered. "Why?" The room waited. Every person seemed focused on Caleb, waiting for some complex explanation, some strategic justification, some hidden business reason. Instead, Caleb gave them the truth. "Because success means something different to me now." Several people exchanged confused looks. Clearly, that wasn't the answer they expected. Caleb continued. "For years, I believed every opportunity should be pursued." His voice remained calm, measured, honest. "I don't believe that anymore." Silence. Nobody interrupted. Nobody seemed sure how to respond. Because this wasn't a business conversation anymore. It was something deeper. The chairman studied him carefully. "You realize history may judge this decision harshly." Caleb smiled slightly. "Maybe." Another pause. Then he added something else. Something that surprised even him. "I'm okay with that." For the first time in years, he truly meant it. The meeting continued. Questions were asked. Arguments were made. Attempts at persuasion followed. Hours passed. Nothing changed. Because Caleb's decision wasn't based on numbers. And numbers can't defeat a decision rooted in values. Eventually, the board accepted reality. The merger would move forward without him. The meeting ended. One by one, people left the room. Some disappointed, some frustrated, some confused, a few quietly respectful, because even those who disagreed recognized something unusual. Caleb had walked away from something most people would never reject, not because he couldn't have it, because he didn't want it enough. Not anymore. The news exploded. Within 24 hours, business media across the country picked up the story. Financial analysts discussed it endlessly. Industry experts debated it. Television programs analyzed it. Online articles questioned it. Everyone seemed to have an opinion. Many believed he had made a mistake. A massive mistake. Some called the decision reckless. Others called it irresponsible. A few called it unbelievable. One headline described it as the most surprising executive decision of the year. Caleb read none of them. For the first time in his professional life, public opinion felt strangely unimportant, because the people criticizing the decision weren't living his life. They weren't the ones who had collapsed in a boardroom. They weren't the ones staring at a box full of memories. They weren't the ones rebuilding trust with a child. Their opinions suddenly carried far less weight. Several days later, Caleb sat at home reviewing ordinary paperwork. Not merger paperwork. Not international expansion documents. Just ordinary work. His phone buzzed. A message appeared. Jada. Simple. Direct. Exactly as always. "Can we talk?" Caleb smiled. Of course. The response arrived almost immediately. Now, 30 minutes later, he stood on Jada's front porch. The moment she opened the door, he knew she had heard the news. The expression on her face made that obvious. Neither spoke immediately. For several seconds, they simply looked at each other. Finally, Jada broke the silence. "You turned it down." Not a question, a statement. Caleb nodded. "Yeah." The words hung between them. Jada stared at him, almost as though she still couldn't believe it. "I thought maybe the reports were wrong." "They weren't." Silence followed, a long silence. Then something unexpected happened. Tears appeared in her eyes. Not dramatic tears, not uncontrollable tears, just emotion, real emotion, the kind people struggle to hide. Caleb stepped closer, concern immediately appearing. "Jada?" She laughed softly, embarrassed by her own reaction, then wiped her eyes. "You idiot." Caleb blinked. "What? You actually did it?" Now, he was completely confused. Jada shook her head, a smile breaking through the emotion. "You really changed." The words landed harder than any criticism ever could, because she knew who he used to be. She knew the old Caleb, the version that always chose work, the version that always chose growth, the version that believed success required sacrifice. And now she was standing in front of proof that he wasn't that person anymore. Neither spoke for several moments. They didn't need to. The decision itself had already said enough, because actions often speak louder than explanations. And Caleb's action had spoken clearly. For the first time in years, he had chosen people first, not business, not ambition. People. The little boy suddenly burst through the hallway, completely unaware of the emotional conversation taking place. He stopped when he saw Caleb. His face immediately brightened. "You came?" Caleb smiled. "Of course." The child grinned, then grabbed his hand, as though Caleb being there was the most natural thing in the world, as though there had never been any doubt, as though he belonged. And standing there in that moment, Caleb realized something. The merger had offered him a bigger future, but this felt like a better one. 1 year later, the sound of laughter filled the backyard. A football flew through the air. The little boy sprinted across the grass, missed the catch completely, then immediately blamed the throw. "That was too high." Caleb laughed. "It hit your hands." "It was still too high." Jada sat nearby shaking her head. Some arguments never changed. The little boy grabbed the football and ran back toward them. His energy seemed endless. His confidence had grown. His smile appeared more often. And perhaps, most importantly, the uncertainty that once lived in his eyes had disappeared. A year had changed many things, not overnight, not magically, one day at a time, one promise at a time, one decision at a time. The routines that once felt new had become normal. Family dinners, weekend activities, school events, movie nights, homework battles, birthday celebrations, the ordinary moments, the moments that quietly become a life. Caleb still ran his company, still worked hard, still led the business he built, but the difference was balance, real balance, for the first time in his adult life. And every day, he became more certain he had made the right choice. The merger headlines had disappeared months ago. The criticism had faded. The predictions had stopped. Meanwhile, something far more important had continued growing. A family. Inside the house, framed photographs covered one wall. Fishing trips, baseball games, science projects, community events, holiday celebrations. The little boy appeared in almost every picture. So did Jada, and more often than not, so did Caleb. One evening, Caleb found himself standing in front of those photographs, studying them, remembering. Jada quietly joined him. Neither spoke immediately. They simply looked. The wall told a story of second chances, a story of showing up, a story of choosing people. Finally, Jada broke the silence. Hard to believe how much changed. Caleb smiled. Yeah. She looked toward him. You know, too. He raised an eyebrow. That usually means something serious. It is. Now, he looked concerned. Jada laughed softly. Then her expression became thoughtful again. The adoption hearing is next week. The words immediately changed the atmosphere. Not because they were unexpected, because they were important. Very important. For months, they had been navigating the process. Paperwork, interviews, home evaluations, meetings, legal requirements, each step bringing them closer, each step carrying emotional weight. The little boy knew about the process. He talked about it constantly, sometimes casually, sometimes excitedly, sometimes nervously, because even children understand when something important is happening. Caleb nodded slowly. Next week. Jada smiled. Next week. Neither spoke afterward. The significance spoke for itself. The hearing arrived on a bright Tuesday morning. The little boy wore his nicest clothes, although he complained about them repeatedly. They itch. You said that already. They still itch. Jada laughed. Caleb laughed. The child sighed dramatically, clearly suffering, at least according to him. By the time they arrived at the courthouse, his mood had improved considerably, mostly because he had discovered a vending machine. The courthouse itself felt quiet, professional, orderly. People moved through hallways carrying documents. Conversations remained low, respectful. Important decisions happened inside buildings like this every day. Yet for Caleb, none felt bigger than today's. They eventually entered the courtroom. The little boy sat between Caleb and Jada. His feet barely touched the floor. He looked around curiously, taking everything in, trying to understand, trying to be patient. Neither came naturally. The hearing began. Questions were asked. Documents were reviewed. Procedures were followed. Nothing dramatic, nothing theatrical, just a legal process. Yet every answer carried emotion, because behind every document existed a story. A real story. A story about loss, about loyalty, about promises, about second chances. The judge listened carefully, reviewing information, asking questions, observing. At one point, the judge looked toward the little boy. Are you happy? The child nodded immediately. Very. The answer came so quickly that several people smiled. The judge smiled too. Then another question followed. Do you love Caleb? The little boy looked confused, as though the answer should be obvious. Of course. Laughter spread gently through the room. The judge nodded, then looked toward Caleb. And do you love him? For a moment, Caleb couldn't speak. Not because he lacked an answer, because emotion arrived first, unexpectedly, powerfully. He looked toward the child sitting beside him, then answered honestly, with all my heart. The courtroom became very quiet, because everyone recognized truth when they heard it, and that had been truth. Simple, unfiltered, absolute. Several minutes later, the judge reviewed the final documents. The room seemed to hold its breath. The little boy sat perfectly still, a rare achievement. Jada squeezed his hand. Caleb sat beside them, waiting, hoping, praying. Then the judge smiled, a warm smile, the kind that instantly changes a room, and finally spoke the words everyone had been waiting to hear. The adoption is approved. For a second, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The moment felt almost unreal. Then everything changed. The little boy's eyes widened. Jada covered her mouth. Tears appeared immediately. Caleb felt emotion hit him harder than expected. The child looked back and forth between them, trying to process what had just happened. Then understanding arrived. Complete understanding. The smile that followed was unforgettable. Pure joy. pure relief, pure happiness, the kind no amount of money could ever purchase. The little boy launched himself toward Caleb, nearly knocking him out of his chair. Neither cared. The courtroom disappeared. The paperwork disappeared. Everything disappeared. Except that moment, that one perfect moment. The child wrapped both arms around him, holding on tightly, very tightly. Then came the word that had once been a wish, the word that had once been hope, the word that had once existed only inside birthday cards and childhood drawings. Dad. Caleb closed his eyes, emotion overwhelming him. The little boy said it again. Dad, not a dream, not a wish, not a hope, officially, forever. That evening they celebrated at home. Nothing extravagant, nothing expensive, just family. The best celebrations often work that way. Laughter filled the house. Stories were shared. Photographs were taken. The little boy seemed incapable of sitting still. At one point, he disappeared upstairs, then returned, carrying the memory box. The same box, the box that changed everything. Carefully, he placed it on the table. Everyone became quiet. The child smiled, then opened it. Inside remained every drawing, every card, every photograph, every memory. Years of believing, years of waiting, years of hope. The little boy gently removed one of the oldest drawings, the picture showing two people fishing. Then he placed it in front of Caleb. You came back. The room became silent. Jada wiped away tears. Caleb looked down at the drawing, then at the child, then at the family sitting around him. And suddenly, he understood the lesson hidden inside this entire journey. Success is not measured by what you accumulate. Success is measured by who feels loved because you were there. Titles fade, money comes and goes, opportunities appear and disappear. But people remember presence. People remember loyalty. People remember who stayed. Caleb almost lost everything while chasing more. Instead, he found something better, a family, a purpose, a home, and the man who once collapsed while trying to build an empire finally discovered the truth. The greatest legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's who you show up for while you're here. Before we end today's story, we'd love to hear from you. What moral lesson did you learn from Caleb's journey? Share your answer in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Mr. Obama Stories for more powerful American stories that inspire, uplift, and remind us what truly matters. Because here, every story has a meaning, and every meaning has a story, and somewhere in the laughter, echoing through that home, a promise had finally become reality. A little boy no longer waited, a family no longer wondered, and a single word said everything that needed to be said. Dad, officially, forever.